Okay, slow ins and moving holds. Alright, so I'm going to start just talking about the idea of controlling the speed of something with a slow in and creating moving hold with a simple sphere, just to kind of get you guys on board with this. So I have a sphere here that just has 3 keys in it, okay? We have a key, a starting key, a middle key, and an end key, okay? So let's talk about if we want to create, say we have movement here, right? And Maya's going to give us whatever it's going to give us. We're only moving left to right, which is really translate x, okay? And even talking about progression in the graph editor, right? That's pretty even, right? Boom, 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 moving about the same value. We're at a value of -30, we're at a value of -15, and now we're at a value, basically a value of 0, right? So it's pretty even. If I want to slow in to, say, the key 30, okay, and I'm going to use something called the tween machine just to start talking about timing and spacing and the use of creating a slow in, okay? And for the timing's sake, I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle, okay? So we're going to 30, I'll just build it on like 15 or 16, okay? And I'm going to say, okay, if I put a breakdown in here in order to try and slow in, you know, and pause a little bit or get slower into 30, it'll look more like this. So so I'm just gonna, if you guys want to play around with the tween machine, I'm just going to use it. I'm not going to teach it to you guys. There's a on milestone 3 on the information sheet that you download, there's a link to it and also a tutorial that shows you how to use it, so you can check that out if you want. I'm going to go over different ways of creating slow ins. I'm just going to use this for my discussion right now though. Okay, so in this case I've created a bit of a slow in by putting a breakdown basically at frame 16, and I'm relying more on spacing. Well, I am relying on spacing. My timing's kind of even, right? The timing from here to here to here is basically the same. The spacing, though, is different. Visually, as you can see it, if you're looking at the grid, right, it pops way over here and then it only scoots over here that much. So the spacing is creating the slow in, right? From here to here, it has the same amount of time to go quite a bit less distance, so it's going to slow down, right, because of that. You can see it in the graph editor. If you guys are using a graph editor, you can see that slow in as far as the progression. We're getting flatter here, right? And we're more, basically, we're steeper here, okay? Obviously, I can push it even farther and get slower and slower, okay? Because the closer I get to there and I don't change the timing, I still have that same amount of time, and I got to go slower and slower and slower to get there. So with the slow in, if you obviously favor the spacing, you can do a lot with it, even if you're, have even timing. Obviously, you can do a bit of the same too with the timing too. You could give this more time between here and here, and it would be even slower. The farther I push this back, you can even see the more steep we get on the other side, and the more flat we get over here, and we get much and much slower, and we pause a lot longer. Okay, and you can see that in the graph editor very clearly, right? Let's see, where are we going next? So I'm going to Z that back, and I'll just keep it simple there. So obviously, that's a slow in going into a key, right? Well, a slow out, if I went the opposite way, right? Now all of a sudden, I got the same timing, but guess what? I'm favoring my first key. Now when I hit play, that's a slow out, and then it goes faster through there, okay? And again, you see that same scenario in the graph editor. Pretty clear, right? So spacing, even, there's a slow out, there's a slow in. That's the basic idea what we're going to be doing. Now, I'm creating this with the tween machine. Obviously, as you can see, you can create this very easily in your graph editor, especially if it's one channel like this. There's a slow in, there's a slow out, okay? The other thing that I want to point out that almost slipped my mind is that when you favor these things, and you can do this with your breakdowns also, because these are breakdowns, okay? These are favoring as far as spacing, right? Not so much timing. Timing's even. So you can, when you favor that, you're creating contrast in your speed. So now you have a much slower area and then a much faster area, and that's creating contrast on how something moves, which makes it more interesting, okay? We call it texture in timing, and just think of it as contrast, okay? So the more you break up your scene and you start favoring, and again, just think of it as what should be faster and what should be slower, okay, in your scene, and push something that's supposed to be fast a little faster and push something that's supposed to be slow a little slower, and you'll start to see that change in that texture, which will get much more interesting in your scene. So slow-ins can really help doing that. Look for all kinds of places to use those, and even little mini slow-ins and slow-outs, okay? So let's see, how else can we do this? So I'm going to show you the way you guys can do it. You can do it obviously in the graph editor, but if you're using it with a whole character, it's much harder to use the graph editor to slow in a whole character because you're talking about many controls. So we use something called middle mouse clicking. Okay, you guys are probably aware of that. So I'm just going to delete this key. When you click and drag, that plays your animation. Okay, when you middle mouse click and drag, it does not play your animation. So this allows you to steal poses, okay, in this case the pose of a sphere. So in this case I can scrub and say, you know what, I want a pose that's close to 30 so I can slow in. So maybe I'll grab 26 and now I'll middle mouse click to keep it in place, and I can move my timeline now without my sphere moving. Oops. And now I can drag it back as far as I want, put my timeline on 14 and now you're going to see that my sphere is where it would have been on my 26, but my timeline's on 14. Now I just key it. And that's a quick way to give me a slow in. All right? Boom. And then I can proceed forward. Okay, guys, so play around with middle mouse clicking. I tend to use a little bit of both. I use the tween machine a bit. I use middle mouse clicking. I use the graph editor, all that way to kind of progress. You know, if I'm in here too and I want certain items to slow in more than the other, I can just very easily, push it a little bit farther so it's a little bit slower and a little bit more quiet. Okay, you can use these everywhere. The thing is too, the way we're working in a scene, when you hit play, a certain number of frames we're going to want to see before your character starts moving. That's a good place even to just put a slight slow in. You know, I can put slow out. I can just put a slight slow out here. You know, so my thing will have a slight slow out into this. I'll just even make it a little bit slower so there's a slight pause there. Boom. And then it'll zip forward and slow in. And even if I want it to hold a little bit longer, I can even put another one here, although it holds pretty well. So let's even say, let's keep this moving a little bit, faster here, and then I really want it to pause and stop here. Now I can even put another slow in that basically creates a little bit more of a hold with a slight drift there just to keep it alive, okay, before it takes off again. And before it takes off again, if I really want, I can obviously slow it out again. And there, that will slow it out again. I think I'm going to move the timing too. And again, I can move the timing on this one to keep it really paused for a while there. And then I can, let's have it zip over and slow in and hold here, okay? So I'm going to middle mouse this one, so I'll just scrub over and grab a pose where it's kind of close to that, 56, move it back to 44, key it. So there's my zip over and my slow in, and then I'm just going to even put another one here just to keep it quiet and really slow it in a bit before we cut, okay? And now when I hit play, zip, pop, stop, cut, okay? So slow-ins, moving holds are really kind of, and I'll show you this on a character. It's just like maybe grabbing something very close to your key and basically doing the same kind of thing, moving over, giving it more time, and keying that. And then you can go in and finesse it to try and give your character a little bit more something that feels natural. With a real character too, your character can be paused, stopping, and kind of looking left and right during a hold, or just standing frozen and breathing a little bit lower, heavily, and maybe an eye blink within that before your character anticipates and moves. So just getting used to stopping your character, slowing them in, and pausing for a minute before they move on to something else. Also with your character, obviously you'll be anticipating before you move on too. So adding an anticipation in here could be nice too. If I'm going to slow in and pause here into 30, maybe 38 was an anticipation, and I can just pull this down, which would anticipate back before he took off and got out of there, okay? Although spheres rarely anticipate. So let's see. So that's the general idea about slowing in, and as you can see, if you're understanding the graph editor, which you really need to be working at this point, this is obviously a pretty easy way to understand it. There's a slow part, slow out, right? Then we're going to go fast, and we're going to slow in a bit. We're going to get a little rickety here. If we really want to get close here, you can see that if I really want to control this and make this nicer, that's where, again, coming in and maybe even finessing this a little bit more to say, yeah, that is much smoother. But if I want this to be a much more quieter pause, I would pull this up a little bit more until we're almost flat, and that would give us a little bit more of a quiet hold, okay, before we anticipate. And then if I want to jet out of there nice and fast, most things have a slight slow out, so if you do this, it's probably going to feel a little unnatural if you go too fast like that, although even with a car, it'll light up and spin its wheels before it goes. But this is animation. You can do whatever you want. Anyhow, guys, hopefully that makes a bit sense about the general idea of using this. So let me jump into a scene and kind of apply this a little bit. So I'll open up, and I'll just kill that guy, or that sphere, and I'll jump down here with my character. Okay, so there's a couple of, this is a scene, an intermediate scene where the character goes from one pose to, oops, I hate when I do that. Let's just do that and open it up again. It's going to go from one pose to another pose, to a second pose, and then there's a third pose, okay? So into the second pose, you're going to see I'm kind of contacting the ground. There's my contact, and I'm going to come down and continue down, and then come back up, and then I'm going to settle into this pose, okay? And I want to create a bit of a slow in here. So there's my breakdown. I start heading up a little bit faster. And if I want, I can even take this off. I'm going to leave this one in here, though. But this is a bit of a breakdown on the way up to slow in and pause at this before I anticipate slightly. You know, rock forward again in anticipation, come down in anticipation. So there's a few things here to get me out of that pause. But let's just put in that idea of how do we slow in for a character. First off, you know, you might have to change your timing, you know, and even if you're going with the timing of your performance, this is animation exaggerated. So push your timing, really get your character to stop a little bit longer. Don't worry about adding an extra 15, 20, 30 frames to your scene. Okay, so I'm just going to select my character and move my timing down just to make sure I have enough time to slow in and pause. And again, how long do we stop for? Well, 24 frames is a second, so if you're not stopping your character for, you know, how long do you stop? If you count it in your head, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, you can easily stop for 3 seconds easily before you anticipate and get out of something, okay? So don't be afraid to open up the timing. Again, it creates what we call texture in how something moves. When you make something very quiet, very still, and then you make something a little bit faster, it gets more interesting. So try and get some contrast in your timing. So if I'm coming up and slowing into this position, right, I'm going to just, middle mouse. I'm going to use the middle mouse method, and I'm going to scrub through here until I get close to about 51, right, and maybe right at about 42. I'm going to middle mouse back and pull back to about 34. I'll key my character, and then that will basically have him come up a little faster. Keep moving here a little bit faster, and then start to slow in and pause. A lot of times, too, if you do this, you can get a pretty good pause and before you anticipate and go, and that may read pretty well. But sometimes it's kind of floaty, and that is pretty floaty. If you look and see how that character is stopping, he never really stops. You see that? That's where the idea of a moving hold comes into play. Alright, so a moving hold is really taking that a bit farther. Now, sometimes you don't really want your character to stop, and sometimes that's, the case. Actually, if we look at in the graph editor, I can show you how you can actually strengthen this in the graph editor. I'm going to just look at his hips just to try and prove a point to you. Let's look at his translate X and see if that shows us what I'm looking for. Not so much. This gives us, coming into that key, it does give us a nice standard steep to flat, which is a slow and a nice progression there. Let's look at the rotates. Sometimes they will give us something else. Or sometimes we'll get exactly what we want. This is all progression from fast to slow, okay? Let me see if I can find somebody who's not doing it. I might have to look in some of the hands or something like that. The hips are all very quiet. So yes, guys, this is not pre-rehearsed. This is all me just working, okay? Let's look at one of his hands then. Nope, those are all giving me the standard. I'm usually a little luckier about finding something that's going to give me a different case scenario. Here's one. Okay, so here's the translate Z in the hand. Little messy. So if I'm looking at this progression, I'm going to see that this is going steep, which is fast, and it's going to start to slow down. But then guess what? It's going to speed up again here. So that's not slowing in. Slowing in would be this, right? So this is why in your rig, if you're trying to slow in nice and smoothly, you've got so many controls and so many channels, right? Or attributes, you should say. Not all of them are always going to give you a standard fast to slow scenario. There will be changes in rhythm, okay, depending on the shape of the curve. If you want to change that, you can just turn around and take that incoming tangent and flatten it out. Okay, using that flat tangent, that's what it does. It always puts it flat. I can do the whole key if I want to. Bang. All right, and that obviously will give me that fast to slow. But obviously, if I want to turn around and make sure the whole character is doing it, I'll select the whole character. I'll flatten out so I can see all my keys. Right there is my hold key. Right. So if I want to make sure that I slow in, I'll grab the in tangent handles and flatten those all. You'll probably see something jump a little, but don't everybody jump. That's everybody who's now is turned into. So it's quite a bit of a change, right? There's a lot of attributes that weren't slowing in. Bang, and now they are. If I want the whole key to slow in, then I can flatten out the whole key and it'll slow out. It'll slow in and slow out, which will make it even more quiet, okay? So let's hit play. A little more quiet as it stopped there, okay? So that's another way to kind of say, okay, I don't want to exactly stop my character. I just want him to really get a little bit quiet and then get out of there. I'm going to ask you guys to use a moving hold. So a moving hold is, and I'll just put this back to auto tangent so everything's a little bit floaty still. And just give yourself another breakdown here as far as middle mouse. Again, I'm going to grab something pretty darn close to 51, 48 or 49, and middle mouse that back to about 41. Key that. And now that should give me a much quieter moment, see? And now it really feels like it stopped, okay, before it starts again. You want to feel like that action has come to a complete stop and settled before your character moves again. And that's just a quick way. You could really get in here now and go in and kind of craft deciding, like, you know, something is moving slightly more, or do you want to slump down a little bit more, or whatever you want. But that's a basic idea of getting your character to kind of soften in. Now I'm just kind of randomly putting these in, these slow ins and these random moving holds for random timing and saying, okay, that's cool. Obviously all of this stuff is negotiable. You can say, that's too hard of a, you know, he stops too soon, so he sticks a little bit. And wrestling with how much and how fast and slowly this happens, how much time, is all part of the process, okay? So I'm not going to wrestle too much with that. I'm just going to put it out there that when you hit play and it stops too quickly or it floats too much, well, then it's your job as an animator to figure out why it doesn't feel correct, why it doesn't feel like a pause or a stop. It feels too floaty, or why it sticks too much and your character jerks to a halt too much and it doesn't feel natural. So then soften it up some. So give it more time, or change it out again, and it maybe you're making your spacing too tight for the slow in, okay? And then just quickly to kind of settle him in. You know, whenever you're stopping your scene too, you want your character, again, you're going to see this all floats into the last pose and he just drifts away, right? So let's look at how that feels. Not really, it's a little floaty, so we can keep him moving just by getting that breakdown to slow in and start to pause here, even into the last pose before we cut. So I'm going to use that tween machine on this one, have my character selected, and I'll say let's keep him moving up to about a frame 99, and I'll push my slider to the right, check my position, and I want it a little bit tighter. Boom, that'll be a little faster, and then I'll slow in a little bit there and see if that feels better. Oops, boom. And obviously I'm doing this in Maya, so the timing is not going to be Exactly correct. And I really, I could put in a moving hold here before I cut and open up my time a little bit more just to make sure it feels soft. Or I can grab my key here, flatten it out once again just to make sure everything slows in. But there's no keys on the other side, so most likely everything is slowing in. Okay. All right, guys. So moving holds and slow ins. Add some of that stuff. Look for any option to, like, even when my character comes up. Before he comes down, that's a good place even to think about putting a slow in. Let's see if I don't know if I have here. There's a pose here, and then he's going to start to come down. Let me just do that real quick before I say goodbye. I'll select this, and why not even open this up? So I'm going to make him slow into this pose before he comes down and rocks back. So I'm going to give this more time, and I'll just push everybody down a bit. And I'll just put the slightest slow in here, okay? Maybe right about there. And there. So again, boom, boom, and boom, and then it'll come down. So just by adding that, I can push the pause here before he gets going into something faster, and that's where maybe the contrast comes in a little bit nicer, where this movement is much faster and broader than this quiet movement, and that's the contrast I'm talking about. Okay, so slow ins are not just for stopping your character, they're also for helping to push the texture, like I said, the contrast and the speed in how your character is moving. Okay, all right, guys, see you next time.